Hello, my fellow weirdlings. It's Margot, and today I'm going to tell you the enduring story of Hollywood icon James Dean's presumably cursed race car, the Little Bastard. But did the Little Bastard get a bad reputation it didn't deserve? Keep watching. Among the superstitious, it's believed that places and objects can be cursed when associated with violence or tragedy. One such curse is said to have befallen James Dean's death car, a 1955 Porsche 550 Spider that he nicknamed Little Bastard. Or was it all a publicity stunt perpetuated by a well-known Hollywood showman? Let's start with the Little Bastards and James Dean's notoriety began. James Dean's was the quintessential Hollywood overnight success story, though he worked pretty hard for a few years to get there, taking bit parts in films and television, performing on Broadway, taking acting classes, and working various jobs, including a CBS parking lot attendant and game show stunt tester to pay his bills. His big break came in the form of a lead role in the film adaptation of John Steinbeck's East of Eden in 1954. This role was quickly followed by two more iconic roles in the films Rebel Without a Cause and Giant. Dean's films would go on to become cult classics, but of those three films, only East of Eden was released before his death. Considered by many to be one of the most talented actors of his generation, James Dean had a very promising future ahead of him that was just beginning. Dean's very short racing career began in 1954 and showed as much early promise as his talent for acting did. Using money from his East of Eden paycheck, he's said to have bought a motorcycle and a couple sports cars, one of which was a Porsche 356 Speedster. His first sanctioned racing event at the Palm Springs Road Races, driving the 356 Speedster, took place just before he began work on Rebel Without a Cause. He did really well, winning first place in the novice class and second place overall. A few weeks later, he finished first in his class and third overall in Bakersfield. His final race took place on Memorial Day 1955 in Santa Barbara, where he was unable to finish due to issues with the Speedster's engine. While filming his final movie, Giant, Dean was contractually banned from racing by the Warner Brothers studio. They felt it was too dangerous. So by the time the movie wrapped, he was anxious to get back on the racetrack. Dean quickly signed up for the next event to be held in Salinas, California on October 1st and 2nd, 1955. He'd ordered a new Lotus Mark 9, but realizing it wouldn't arrive in time, he canceled that order and headed to Competition Motors on September 21st, 1955 to purchase a new race car in person. That's where he fell in love with a sleek silver-gray Porsche 550 Spider. The ultra-lightweight, aluminum-bodied 550 Spider was Porsche's most desirable sports racer of its day. Only about 90 of these cars were ever produced. With a top speed of 140 miles per hour, the 550 Spider was faster and more track-oriented than the Speedster Dean was used to racing. Beyond the racetrack, the 550 Spider was known as a car that the racer could drive to the event, compete in it, and then drive it home. After trading in the Speedster and paying about $7,000 for the Spider, it was delivered to Dean on the Warner Brothers lot on his last day of filming Giant. But as special as the average 550 Spider was, this one was apparently even more exceptional, because it said that wherever it went, injury, misfortune, and death were sure to follow, leading to one of the strangest unexplained mysteries of the car world for over 60 years and counting. 2 days after purchasing his new car, the story goes that Dean took it to a man named George Barris for customization. George Barris was known as the king of the customizers in Hollywood, and the creative genius behind many of the most recognizable cars in cinematic history. Dean had previously met Barris on the set of Rebel Without a Cause. Barris's works include the original 1966 Batmobile, the Munsters Coach and Dragula, the Beverly Hillbillies Oldsmobile Roadster, and the National Lampoon's Griswold Family Truckster. Legend has it, though I will cover conflicting information at the end of this video, Dean went to Barris's shop that day to have his 550 Spider seats reupholstered in tartan, red stripes painted over each of the rear wheels, and the number 130 painted on the car's doors, hood, and engine cover. The car then went next door to the shop of legendary pinstriper and monkey mobile builder Dean Jeffries, who painted the words "Little Bastard" on the rear cowling. This was a name Dean had been given by his friend and legendary stunt driver, Bill Hickman. And with those minor customizations, the Little Bastard was born. Dean was so excited about his new race car, he was seen around Hollywood throughout the following week, showing it off to everybody, friends and strangers alike. At one point, Dean met up with actor Alec Guinness, the future Obi-Wan Kenobi, at a Hollywood restaurant. Of course, he was eager to show him his new car. Frequently paraphrased from Guinness's autobiography, he wrote, "The sports car looked sinister to me. Exhausted, hungry, feeling a little ill-tempered, in spite of Dean's kindness, I heard myself saying, in a voice I could hardly recognize as my own, 'Please, never get in it. If you get in that car, you'll be found dead in it by this time next week.'" Dean just laughed off Guinness's warning, saying, "Oh shucks, don't be so mean." A longer version of this anecdote gives slightly different details that kind of make more sense. That one states that Guinness asked Dean how fast the car went. When Dean responded that it could do about 150 miles per hour, and he'd just bought it a couple days prior, that's when Guinness expressed his foreboding. Now, Dean loved to drive fast, and that tiny lightweight car would probably have been seen as a death trap by a lot of people. So maybe this was more of a common sense feeling of foreboding than a metaphysical one. But Guinness, the lore tells us, wasn't the only one who reacted to the Little Bastard with a definite lack of enthusiasm. There's a story that Dean's close friend and fellow actor, Eartha Kitt, the original and in my opinion best Catwoman, reportedly told Dean, "Jamie, I don't like this car, it's going to kill you," while the two were out for a drive in it. If this were true, I feel like it could have had more to do with Dean's driving than the car itself, but the combination of the two must have been fairly worrisome. I should clarify, as great as Dean's driving was on the racetrack, it doesn't sound like it exactly translated well to public roads and more cautious passengers. In any case, I'm not sure that particular drive with Eartha Kitt actually took place. I found an interview where she emotionally described her final moments with her beloved Jamie, but this is really no less ominous. She said, "When I was with him in Hollywood, he met me at the door because he'd been staying with Arthur Lowe. He opened the door for me, and we hugged one another like we always did. I didn't feel him. I didn't feel his spirit. And I said, 'Jamie, what are they doing to you in Hollywood? I don't feel your spirit.' Dean dismissively responded, 'Kit, you're on one of your voodoo trips again.' The next day, she left to open her show in Las Vegas. A few days later, a chorus girl broke the news. Jamie's dead. Ms. Kitt said, 'I already knew it. He was gone the Sunday before when I'd hugged him. He wasn't there.'" Another story states that Dean's girlfriend, actress and first ever Bond girl, Ursula Andress, refused to get in the car at all, claiming the car had an evil presence. I guess that doesn't leave much room for interpretation. However, there's no proof Dean was dating Andress at the time of his death, though they definitely were photographed on dinner dates about a month earlier, and were rumored to have had a volatile relationship earlier in the year. And he had gone to the movies with Andress and his close friend Lou Bracker a couple nights prior to his death. Actor Nick Adams and Dean's uncle Charlie Nolan also reportedly refused to get in the car for similar reasons. Again, I couldn't find proof that these interactions happened. In fact, it said that Dean's uncle actually went for a quick ride in the Little Bastard the morning of Dean's death. I couldn't confirm which uncle, though. The day before filming wrapped on Giant, Dean gave co-producer Henry Ginsberg a ride to the studio. When they got there, Ginsberg told the production department, "If you have any loose ends, you better tie them up quick. The way this kid's handling that car, I don't think he's going to be around much longer." Car customizer George Barris was also later quoted as saying, "There was something strange about that particular car. It made me uneasy. Dean was all worked up about how he was going to race it that weekend, but I couldn't get enthusiastic about it. I had crazy feelings about wanting to stop him as I watched him drive away from my shop." It's unknown if Dean was starting to sense something sinister about the car or his upcoming trip as well, or if everyone else's misgivings were starting to spook him. But the story goes that the day before his death, Dean suddenly gave away a Siamese kitten named Marcus that co-star Liz Taylor had given him on the set of Giant. He reportedly told a friend he was rehoming the cat because he may go out and not come back. Now, the information I was able to find about this kitten is that Dean left him with a friend, actress Jeanette Miller, along with these handwritten instructions for the cat's care and feeding. It looks to me like Dean intended to leave the cat with his friend for the duration of his trip to Salinas, not forever. There is also the enduring rumor that Dean had stated he felt destined to die in a speeding car. I have no idea if that's truth or lore. Much of it is hopelessly tangled at this point, because it makes for a better story. But Dean did love a good story, so he'd probably appreciate the mythology. Nonetheless, with potentially many warnings ringing in Dean's ears, he headed out for his first race behind the wheel of the Little Bastard on September 30th, 1955, 9 days after he purchased the doomed 550 Spider. Before the road trip to Salinas, just over 300 miles north of LA, Dean took the Little Bastard back to Competition Motors and factory-trained Porsche mechanic Rolf Wutherich to prepare the car for the upcoming race. This included installing a safety belt across the driver's seat. Since Dean was going to be racing alone, Wutherich didn't install one on the passenger side. Dean tried the seatbelt in the garage, but ultimately never actually used it on the road. The original plan was for Dean to tow the race car on a trailer behind his 1955 Ford Country Squire station wagon, but Wutherich suggested he drive the Little Bastard instead, which would give Dean a chance to break in the engine and familiarize himself with the new car. After having a quick lunch of coffee and donuts at the Hollywood Ranch Market, half a block away from Competition Motors, they set off in the 550 Spider, with Dean behind the wheel and Wutherich in the passenger seat. Following along behind them in Dean's station wagon were stuntman Billy Hickman and a photojournalist named Sanford H. Roth, also known as Sandy, who had been shadowing Dean for Collier's magazine and planned to document his race that weekend. The photos Roth took during this time with James Dean are nothing short of iconic. Unfortunately, he'd soon be photographing Dean's death scene as well. When they set off from LA, it was about 1:15 p.m. on a beautiful sunny day, perfect for a scenic drive. Dean was in a happy mood and reportedly murmured "Life is wonderful," chain-smoking cigarettes as the Little Bastard wound through the mountain road between Los Angeles and Bakersfield. At a refreshment stop a little before 3 p.m. at Tip's Restaurant at Castaic Junction, Hickman reportedly warned Dean that he should watch his speed in the Little Bastard because its low profile and silver color had made the car difficult to see on the highway. At about 3:30 p.m., both vehicles were pulled over by California Patrolman O.V. Hunter, just south of Bakersfield. Dean was given a ticket for driving 65 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. He tried explaining to the officer that the Porsche wouldn't perform well if driven under 60 miles per hour. The cop insisted he slow down anyway. Later, Officer Hunter revealed that he'd saved the ticket with Dean's court date October 17th and had it framed. Hickman, following close behind Dean so Roth could get pictures of the Porsche, was given a ticket for going 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. Because he was towing the Little Bastard's trailer, the speed limit for him was lowered to 45. At a rest stop called Blackwell's Corner on Highway 466, now known as State Route 46, the group met up with fellow Salinas racers Lance Reventlow and Bruce Kessler for more refreshments. Dean had an apple and a Coca-Cola. Reventlow and Kessler reportedly warned Dean that there were an unusual amount of police in the area, suggesting it would be wise for him to keep his speed at the legal limit. Before leaving, Dean told Kessler that he'd hit 100 miles per hour on the open stretch of road between Bakersfield and Blackwell's Corner. He stated, "I want to keep this car for a long time, a real long time, before heading back out on the road." At approximately 5:15 p.m., the group continued heading west on Highway 466 toward Paso Robles. Dean sped off ahead of the station wagon, with Wutherich reputedly reminding him of Hickman's warning about the car's low observability. If all of these details are true, that was, including the earlier speeding ticket, the fourth warning about speed that Dean had been given that day. But Dean was going to do what Dean was going to do. I get the feeling this was an ongoing issue. About 30 minutes later, with the sun falling behind the mountains in the distance and shining in Dean's eyes, a black and white 1950 Ford Tudor coupe was heading toward them from the opposite direction. That car was driven by a 23-year-old Cal Poly student named Donald Turnipseed. Unable to see the tiny Porsche Spider, Turnipseed began to make a left-hand turn across the narrow intersection where Highway 466 met Highway 41, taking him right into Dean's path. According to Rolf Wutherich, Dean saw the car heading toward them with just enough time to exclaim, "That guy's gotta stop, he'll see us." But unfortunately, Turnipseed didn't see them until the very last moment. The Ford slammed into the driver's side of the little bastard, catapulting the lightweight race car 50 feet into the air before cartwheeling it into a shallow gully next to a telephone pole. Wutherich was thrown from the car, landing on the shoulder of the road. He suffered a badly broken jaw, a shattered leg, and other internal injuries, though he ultimately did recover, at least physically. The driver of the much sturdier Ford, Donald Turnipseed, emerged from his vehicle virtually unscathed, though dazed and in shock, suffering only a scraped nose and bruises, the left front fender ripped off his car. On the advice of a highway patrol officer, Turnipseed hitchhiked back to his hometown of Tulare after the crash. Following a coroner's inquiry, Turnipseed was absolved from blame. He later said the accident happened in a snap of a finger. He simply couldn't see the little silver-gray car until it was too late. Dean's side of the little bastard suffered the brunt of the impact, causing his head to strike the steering wheel and snap back so violently he was nearly decapitated. Trapped in the twisted metal of the wreckage, with the steering wheel crushing his chest and his foot crushed between the pedals, Dean soon died from a broken neck, along with multiple fractures of the upper and lower jaw, multiple fractures of both arms, severe head injuries, and massive internal bleeding. James Dean was pronounced dead on arrival at Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital at 6:20 p.m. on September 30th, 1955. He was 24 years old. Dean's simple closed-casket Quaker funeral service was held on October 8, 1955, in his hometown of Fairmount, Indiana, with over 600 mourners in attendance and another 2,400 grieving fans gathered outside. Following the news of Dean's sudden death was an outpouring of grief and devastation from teenagers across the nation, who heavily identified with his angst-ridden performance in East of Eden. With one role, though not yet a household name, the young actor had forever touched the lives of millions. Dean's fame grew to epic proportions after his death. He's still the only actor to receive 2 Academy Award nominations posthumously, in 1956 for Best Leading Actor in East of Eden, and in 1957 for Best Leading Actor in Giant. To this day, he has a pretty massive cult following. So now we have to question, with his particularly violent death and the national outpouring of grief and angst that followed, did Dean's car, the little bastard, somehow absorb that anguish and continue to take it out on others who crossed its path from that tragic day forward? Or could James Dean's fear, and perhaps even anger, in the final moments of his life, have been imprinted on his prized race car and violently unleashed on unsuspecting victims? Many actually believe this to be the case. At this point, I'll tell you the most widely circulated version of the story of the little bastard curse. We'll pick it apart afterward. After the accident, the little bastard was a total loss. The car's customizer, George Barris, bought what was left of the little bastard from the insurance company for $2,500, with the presumed intention of either parting it out or selling tickets to look at it. It's also been said that Barris had toyed with the idea of rebuilding the car, but upon seeing the extent of the damage, he realized it wouldn't be possible. But the little bastard curse took no time to target its first victim. When the car was delivered to Barris's shop, it slipped off its trailer and landed on the mechanic, breaking one or both of his legs. Not able to do much else with it, Barris ended up selling off some of the little bastard's usable parts. He sold the engine to Dr. William F. Eshridge for use in his Lotus 9 race car. The transmission was sold to Eshridge's friend, Dr. Troy Lee McHenry, for use in his custom Porsche Spider. Both doctors entered their cars fitted with the parts from the little bastard in the SCCA Pomona Fairgrounds race on October 24, 1956. During that event, McHenry's car spun out of control in the very first lap and hit the only tree on the track, killing him instantly. Eshridge's car rolled several times while taking a curve, leaving him with serious injuries. He later stated that the vehicle had inexplicably just locked up on him. A few months later, 2 of the little bastard's tires that Barris had sold to a man from New York simultaneously blew out on a highway, causing the driver to run off the road into a ditch. Fortunately, that driver survived. Upon examining what was left of the tires after the incident, Barris couldn't establish any cause for the sudden blowouts. While the little bastard was stored in Barris's shop, there were 2 instances in which vandals were injured while trying to steal parts off the car. The first involved a young man who tried to steal the steering wheel and received a gash on his arm that went all the way to the bone from a piece of jagged metal. The second instance resulted in serious injury to a thief who was trying to steal Dean's blood-stained driver's seat as memorabilia. In 1957, the California Highway Patrol convinced Barris to loan them the car for a traveling exhibition aimed at convincing teenagers of the importance of safe driving. James Dean was still very popular among teens. The little bastard then became the star of a national traveling roadshow from 1957 to 1959. At one point, the little bastard was transporting north for an exhibition by flatbed. Near Salinas, the truck was involved in a serious accident that ejected the driver, George Berquist, from the cab. Though injured, Berquist did initially survive that accident. But then, as if on cue, the little bastard suddenly fell off the flatbed and landed on top of Berquist, crushing him to death. At another point, while in between exhibitions, the little bastard was briefly stored in a Fresno garage. In late March of 1959, the garage caught fire and burned to the ground. Everything was destroyed except for the little bastard, which somehow sustained no damage. On September 30th, 1959, the 4th anniversary of James Dean's death, the little bastard was on display at Sacramento High School when the bolts holding the car in place suddenly snapped. The car fell off the display stand and broke the hip of a 15-year-old boy who'd been examining the wreckage. In another instance, while being transported through Oakland, California, the little bastard suddenly broke into 2 separate pieces and fell on the freeway, causing a serious traffic accident. A few weeks later, a transporter carrying the car smashed through a plate glass store window after the truck's parking brake failed while parked on top of a hill. By 1960, George Barris must have viewed the little bastard as a complete liability while out in the world. He had the car loaded onto a freight train in Miami and sent back to his shop in Los Angeles in a sealed boxcar. Upon arrival, the boxcar was unsealed and opened, but the container was completely empty. The little bastard had vanished and has never been seen again. Over the years, substantial rewards have been offered for information leading to the whereabouts of the little bastard, without receiving any viable leads. But in 2005, the Volo Auto Museum in Volo, Illinois, put out a $1 million reward on the 50th anniversary of James Dean's death. A decade later, an anonymous man came forward, claiming he witnessed his father and some other men hide the little bastard behind a false wall in a building in Washington state when he was 6 years old. The man said he wouldn't reveal the location of the building until he received a portion of the reward money. The building also wasn't the man's property, so he wouldn't be able to just start knocking down walls there. He was, however, given a polygraph test, which he passed. He also volunteered some details about the car that apparently checked out. He even showed a scar on his hand that he claimed to have from a cut he received from the car that night. A representative of George Barris said at the time, "It would be exciting if it was the real car. We aren't saying that it's a hoax. We've been through this before. We get calls every year, people saying we found the car in the backyard. However, upon closer inspection, the claims have all gone away." But one part of the little bastard did turn up. In 2020, the car's transaxle was found in a wooden crate in rural Massachusetts, where it had been stored for 30 years. Its origin has been verified by Porsche, and it sold at auction for an unprecedented $387,000. The transaxle is currently on display at Zach Bagans' The Haunted Museum in Las Vegas. Now we'll get to some fact-checking, the information most articles aren't going to tell you. Some folks believe the entire Little Bastard curse was a story made up by George Barris for publicity. I've been unable to figure out if all of the stories originated directly from Barris, but there's definitely a lack of evidence that the incidents happened the way Barris's lore tells us they did. In fact, there is evidence that some of the stories were embellished, if not completely fabricated. The discrepancies begin right after James Dean's fatal accident with the purchase of the little bastard's wreckage. While George Barris and his spokespeople have said Barris immediately bought the car and all of its parts from the insurance company, there's documentation proving Dr. William Wutherich actually purchased the car before George Barris did. By the time Barris purchased what remained of the little bastard, it was basically just the mangled shell. That means Barris couldn't have sold cursed parts to Wutherich or his friend Troy McHenry. I'm unclear on whether Barris ever had ownership of the little bastard's tires. Author Lee Raskin, an internationally recognized expert on James Dean and Porsches, asserts that while McHenry did purchase the little bastard's transmission from Wutherich, he hadn't installed it in his car before the race that resulted in his death. This is backed up by Wutherich, who did an interview the day after the accident saying, "I don't believe he was using the transmission when he crashed, but he was using the back swinging arms, which holds the rear end." So I guess that doesn't rule out the curse for McHenry entirely. McHenry did apparently die in the way the lore describes, and Wutherich did have a fender bender on that same day. Another event that did actually happen, though not the way it's usually described, was the Fresno garage fire. There are newspaper reports from the next day stating that while temporarily stored in a Fresno garage, the little bastard caught fire, awaiting display as a safety exhibit in a coming sports and custom automobile show on the night of March 11, 1959. The Spider incurred only slight damage, while no other vehicles were harmed. To my knowledge, none of the other incidents of the little bastard curse have been corroborated, or were documented by first-hand sources other than George Barris. Raskin thinks the entire curse lore was conjured up by George Barris in his 1974 book, Cars of the Stars. He points out that even the story about Barris doing some of the little bastard's customizations before Dean's death are untrue, that Dean Jeffries actually did all of the work and not just the lettering. Lou Bracker, Dean's best friend in LA and fellow Porsche racer, has also stated that Barris wasn't involved in Dean's racing preparations. A receipt has even been produced from Dean Jeffries' shop that shows he did the work. Raskin has said the only reason Barris bought the car was to earn profits from its exploitation. Once the novelty of Dean's death began to wear off, Barris began creating stories to keep the money coming in. While the car was too far gone to rebuild it, Barris tried to resurrect the little bastard by welding aluminum over the severely damaged areas, then beating the aluminum panels with a 2x4 to simulate collision damage. In the end, Raskin believes Barris junked the car because it was falling apart, making up the mysterious disappearance from a locked train car story to keep the mystique alive. There are other small discrepancies in the popular version of the little bastard curse mythology. While it's often stated that the California Highway Patrol took the little bastard on a tour of safe driving exhibitions, that agency has no record of those events. This is because Barris actually loaned the wreckage to the Los Angeles chapter of the National Safety Council in 1956 for a local car show. The display was presented as James Dean's last sports car, but the California Highway Patrol was still apparently involved because I found them listed on some of the advertisements. While more exhibits did take place from 1957 to 1959, there's no evidence of any of the injuries, deaths, or mishaps that were said to have happened during that tour, as far as I can tell. The macabre display was shown at car shows, movie theaters, bowling alleys, and highway safety displays throughout California. Everyone does seem to agree that the little bastard did make it to Miami and didn't make it back to Los Angeles. But I don't think there's any proof the car actually left Miami in a sealed train car, or by any other means. I'm not sure many people actually believe it did. Raskin has gone on record stating that Barris has been discredited by Porsche and James Dean historians and archivists. George Barris died in 2015, taking his secrets with him. There are even some discrepancies in a couple witness statements from the accident that killed James Dean. The alternative recollections that Rolf Wutherich had been driving the car, for instance, didn't hold up at the ensuing inquiry. This rumor may have been started to protect Dean's image, or the witnesses simply got confused in the chaos, but it was seemingly based on testimony that Dean's unconscious body was found face down on the passenger side of the small car when the ambulance arrived, with Wutherich outside of the car lying on the ground face down. but the fact that Dean's foot had to be removed with a crowbar from being crushed between the clutch and brake of the car tells us he was fairly certainly the driver. While early news reports estimated that the little bastard was traveling at 85 to 90 miles per hour before colliding with Donald Turnipseed's Ford, a lot of fans refused to believe Dean was speeding at the time of the collision, despite his habit of doing so. In fact, recent reports and evidence suggest that he may have been driving at only 53 to 55 miles per hour, with 55 being the speed limit on Route 466. This was calculated by the position of his body and the wreck, as noted by a highway patrol officer at the scene of the accident. From the original coverage of the coroner's inquiry into the accident, it seems the 1955 estimation of Dean's speed, being set at 85 to 86 miles per hour, was calculated based on Wutherich's estimation that they'd stopped at Blackwell's Corner for about 15 minutes, combined with the calculation of distance by the officer that had issued their speeding tickets earlier in the day, between the spot where they'd been pulled over and the location of the accident. This is still in hot debate, but I don't think speed really needed to be a factor with visibility such an issue. After deliberating for only 24 minutes, a jury verdict of accidental death with no criminal intent was returned. It was determined that the low profile and silver-gray color of the little bastard were factors in the accident, as the color of the car blended with the mountains and the road at that time of day. Witnesses agreed that Donald Turnipseed did try to swerve away from Dean's car once he was able to see it, and the skid marks left by Turnipseed's tires seemed to back that up, but at that point he was already too close to avoid the collision. Donald Turnipseed was a very private man who spent the next 40 years of his life avoiding publicity, building a successful family electrical contracting business. He died of lung cancer in 1995 at the age of 63. A lot of people, including forensic medical professionals, also take issue with the way Dean's body was handled at the scene. It's not certain how long he was still alive, but it seems he was handled pretty roughly for someone with a broken neck and other serious injuries. His neck wasn't even braced. I know things were done somewhat differently in the 1950s, but neck injuries were no less delicate or catastrophic back then. Dean was reportedly unconscious but still breathing when the ambulance arrived. To make matters worse, Wutherich was startled awake when the ambulance that he and Dean were both being transported in somehow managed to get into an accident on the way to the hospital. He said he looked over and saw Dean, maybe dead already, possibly barely alive, on a gurney next to him, not even strapped in place. With a severe neck injury, it seems like that second collision could have been the jolt that did Dean in. I'm not saying James Dean's life could have been saved if he'd received proper emergency care at the scene. With those injuries, his chances of living or having any quality of life would have been slim. He was possibly already dead when they put him in the ambulance, but a neck brace sure as hell couldn't have hurt. For a long time, there was even a persistent rumor that James Dean was still alive somewhere, disfigured and living in hiding, or that he'd faked the entire thing and just didn't want to be famous anymore. It could be argued that the little bastard curse did eventually catch up with Dean's passenger, Rolf Wutherich, who was 29 years old at the time of the crash. After the accident, Wutherich endured multiple surgeries over the next 6 months. It later came out that while he was laid up in the hospital, mostly refusing to talk about the accident, his then wife did interviews on his behalf without his consent, so a lot of the early quotes from him weren't authentic. He worked as a Porsche mechanic and rally driver over the years, but struggled with worsening depression, psychological issues, and alcoholism. He attempted suicide multiple times. This was compounded by the fact that some of Dean's fans blamed Wutherich for the actor's death and sent him abusive, threatening letters. This was probably due to the rumor that Wutherich had been driving that day, or partly due to Wutherich talking Dean into driving the Porsche to Salinas instead of trailering the race car, though I'm sure it didn't take much persuading. Wutherich was married 4 times. The second marriage ended shortly after his own wife accused him of killing James Dean. But his 4th and final marriage went way worse. On May 1, 1967, Wutherich stabbed his wife Doris 14 times with a kitchen knife while she slept, after attempting to take his own life. Doris did somehow survive the attack. He was arrested in 1969 and found guilty of attempted manslaughter. Due to his mental instability, he did his time in a mental institution instead of prison. In July of 1981, Wutherich signed a contract for a feature TV show to discuss the death of James Dean. Later that same month, on July 22nd, an intoxicated Wutherich lost control of his Honda Civic, crashed into the wall of a residence, and was pronounced dead at the scene of the accident. He was 53 years old. Today, the intersection where James Dean probably took his last breath is a site of pilgrimage for his fans from Hollywood and auto racing alike. A road sign designates it as the James Dean Memorial Junction. But that particular intersection has actually seen dozens of fatal accidents over the decades since James Dean's death, and it saw plenty before his. He just became the poster boy for dying at that location because he's the most famous. While the intersection is slightly different now than it was in 1955, since the highway's been realigned, the current design, known as the Shalom Y, is flawed, resulting in fatalities 3 times the state average. It looks like there are currently plans to widen the road. The actual James Dean accident site is now a field. In the nearby town of Shalom stands a metal sculpture completed in 1977 that reads James Dean, February 8, 1931 to September 30, 1955, 5:59 p.m. To this day, people swear they've seen the ghost of James Dean around that intersection. Some have even claimed to have stopped to pick him up as a hitchhiker, only to realize he's disappeared shortly afterward. Even the specter of the cursed 550 Spider, the little bastard, with Dean behind the wheel, has been seen speeding down the highway. At his gravesite in Fairmount, Indiana, it's said that if a visitor places an unlit cigarette on his headstone after dark and leaves it for a while, when they return they'll find the cigarette lit and the scent of cigarette smoke in the air. Others have claimed their cigarette completely disappeared. Dean's ghost has also been spotted sitting on his tombstone, and cold spots can be felt around his grave even in the summer heat. Just weeks before his fatal crash, James Dean filmed a public service announcement with TV host Gig Young for the National Safety Council to promote safe driving, saying, "Take it easy driving. The life you might save might be mine." But yet he ended up becoming the Hollywood icon most associated with the phrase "live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse." Was all of this curse, coincidence, conspiracy, or creative writing on the part of the customization king? I'll leave that up to you to decide. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this topic and will come back for more. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and bring your friends, family, COVID pod, cult members, invisible friends, or enemies. And if you have anything to add, leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.